You are listening to the Enormocast.
They're finally here, folks. The prettiest thing to ever be shoved in a crack. The new Black Diamond Ultralight C4. The featherweight camming champion of the world. 20 to 30% lighter than the old C4s, which means they're 20 to 30% more sick. The BD Ultralight cams are more lightweight than bailing off the nose because you ran out of baby wipes. They're more lightweight than that kid from Provo who fell on the campfire after 2 beers in Indian Creek. True story. They're the device that's oh so nice and the cam that can handle the slam. If you dream of climbing with different cams, you should wake up and apologize. So check out blackdiamondequipment.com for the specs on these little beauties, or head over to your nearest climbing retailer to fondle them with your own chubby knuckles. Put the cam down, sir. So let's say you've taken the advice you've heard on the Enormocast and played it ice climbing cool with that special climbing friend, going on trip after trip like your family, even though you've had the hots for him or her since they burned you off your proj in flips and a ratty pair of Yojimbos from the Lost and Found. Well, if the perfect belay isn't conveying your longing, perhaps the climbing-inspired jewelry and accessories of Peter Gilroy will help you put the punctuation on that date that's not a date, might be a date, climbing date. At peterwgilroy.com, you'll find jewelry, money clips, belt buckles, hats, and more, all inspired by the rock and the mountains on which your love has flourished. So please, before you resort to the lean-in or the forgotten sleeping bag or the embarrassing confessional after a 12-pack around the campfire, try a classier approach with a spectacular gift from peterwgilroy.com. And if you crash and burn, know that Peter and Enormocast still appreciate your support, even if your partner does short rope you to the curb. And remember, enter Enormo at checkout for a discount. But keep that part to yourself.
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
big
big
house. We
place
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
2006.
We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is 11 a.m., January 21st, 2016. This is episode 97 of the Enormocast, a conversation with alpinist and all-around climber Jay Smith. Strange time to be doing the Enormocast. I worked this morning. Now it's a sunny day out, and I'm sitting here talking to you guys remotely through space and time. I'm talking to you because this could be very long in the future. Just got back from the Ouray Ice Fest. I go to the Ice Fest the last couple of years kind of undercover. I have no official connection. I don't do any official events. I don't even know who really runs that whole thing. I don't get any interviews. I basically just go to have fun. And having fun means ice climbing just a little teeny tiny bit and then moving on. Mostly having fun means hanging out in the hot springs and drinking and dancing. And this year was no different. But I tell you, climbing out in the ice park during the festival is kind of epic. Like, first of all, there's tons of people, more than really they can handle, which is to be understood at a climbing festival. But there's a lot of sketchy shit going on out there. And I know they probably don't have any liability. There's some clause to make sure that everything is individual responsibility, but there's some folks out there that really shouldn't be on their own climbing anywhere, let alone ice climbing. I mean, I realize it's top roping and the anchors are all right there for you, but, I'm talking about running into people who are like all by themselves and not being able to tie their knots and not really understanding anything about equalization and, I don't know, just some wild stuff out there. I didn't have to kind of intervene, although I helped out a couple people. But, yeah, I don't know. You guys, like, what is it with the ice park? Is it just too easy? Is it a too easy access? Like nobody has to sort of pass any kind of natural selection to walk in there? Anyway, yeah, it's not my problem, I guess. But Ice Fest, a lot of fun. Ice Park's pretty cool. The Wiesbaden, look, without going to the Wiesbaden, I don't think I would go to Ice Fest. And like all you guys, I know spending money on accommodation is like the lowest thing on your dirtbag list. Every once in a while out there, you throw down for a Motel 6 so you can watch a little HBO and get a shower. But the Wiesbaden, it's relatively affordable. And I tell you what, you come off of those cold days, although once again, the Ice Fest was rather pleasant temperature-wise. And if you tried a lot harder than I did and actually had some muscle strain and you're cold, your muscles hurt, whatever, like dipping in those pools is so worth it. Affordable, friendly. Check it out. The Wiesbaden. They're my best friends now. Wiesbaden, which is spelled with a W. It's actually kind of funny to tell people where you're staying that's never heard of it. They will make you repeat it like 14 times. Wiesbaden. It's German for hot springs, I think. Something to do with water. Moving on, let's talk about Jay Smith a little bit. Jay was actually one of those guys who was a bit reluctant to come on the Enormocast. He was talked into it. I think he did a great job once he settled in, but he is of a ilk and maybe even a generation that I think aren't supposed to talk about themselves at length. They're supposed to let their feats and their ascents and their accomplishments stand for themselves. It's no surprise that Jay's good buddies with Jack Tackle, another guy that believes in keeping it on the DL. But anyway, Jay came on, was gracious to host me and some friends at his house, and came on the podcast. Another thing I want to say about the interview that's a little strange if you listen carefully is that we keep talking about his very recent, at the time, a couple months ago, trip to the Himalaya. And we mention it, but we never go into it, which I know seems like sort of an oversight in my part. But Jay wasn't really ready to talk about the trip. He had literally just returned within a couple days and was still kind of hobbling around. And they just hadn't yet processed the whole thing. And they'd gone pretty far out there. So he wasn't quite ready to talk about it. So that's why we kept mentioning it in the flow of the conversation, but never really got into it. I actually haven't seen if anything's been written about it yet, even. Like I said, this was a couple months ago. So anyway, keep an eye out for that. And I don't keep that close attention. There's too much media to take it all in. So maybe something's been written about it. I don't know. I don't even know where to start looking because I can't remember the peak they climbed, or tried to climb rather. Anyhow, so that's going on in there as well. Otherwise, great interview. And I really appreciate the fact that Jay let down his guard a little bit and sat down for an interview. So let's get to it. Episode 97, conversation with Jay Smith.
I'm sitting in the mobile studio, and it almost didn't make it here because the clutch started to go out on the way from Moab. I'm in Castle Valley with Jay Smith at Jay Smith's house. Thanks for having me over here, Jay. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming by.
It's a beautiful place. I mean, you must know that. It's incredible where you're living.
Well, thanks.
What brought you to Castle Valley?
Well, I started climbing out here in 1982, and it was actually on a trip that I was guiding at the time, and I had never been out here, and I had a climb for a month, and we went to Joshua Tree and Red Rocks and came out here and went to Indian Creek, and it was unbelievable. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it, hadn't climbed anything quite like it, fell in love with the place, and just kept coming back.
Right. And you said that you moved here when there was basically nobody here.
I moved here in 1990.
Right.
Well, I bought my property in 1990.
Right. So it was was it the price a big part of it? I mean, was it pretty easy to get into something out here?
Yeah. That was definitely the time, I mean, you could buy 5 acres here for $9,500.
Ah. Yeah. That's awesome.
Those times are gone.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I mean, there's some big places out here and kind of bourgeoisie has moved in, it seems like.
Well, Moab has changed since those days, for sure.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to that. So, Jay, the thing that, I did my modicum of research that I do for these things, because I already feel like I know everything about climbing. But, I Google somebody for, a few minutes. And the interesting thing is that your web presence is not super strong. I came across some...
Good.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's where I'm going to go with this. But I came across some forum posts of where are they now question of hey, where's Jay Smith anyway? Or can anybody get in touch with Jay Smith? And I think Danini knows him. Get in touch with Danini or whatever. And it sort of started to dawn on me that's been kind of a part of your career, if you want to call it that. And I was kind of wondering if that's me projecting on you, or has that philosophy of getting things done but not necessarily having this sort of presence with fame or with, in nowadays the internet or anything else. Is that part of your personality, or was that an objective you had, or is it just something that's happened?
I mean, it's probably something that's just happened, but, places that I've climbed, I mean, for me, it's always been, the biggest draw has been the first ascent.
Okay.
And so that's what drew me here to Moab.
In 1982, it was wide open.
What's that?
In 1982, it was wide open.
In 82, it was wide open, yeah. And then before that, I was in Tahoe, and when I moved to Tahoe, and first time I went there was 76, and it was wide open. And first time I went to Red Rocks was, I don't know, late 70s, maybe, something like that. And they were building the loop road. And so, I met Randy Grandstaff, and there was no climbers.
Right.
So everywhere I've gone, there was no climbers, except, Indian Creek, there was a couple. Steve Hong was still climbing there at the time.
Right.
That's what's always drawn me to these places, So when a place gets crowded, I'll just move on.
Okay. And that's, I guess, going back to that, is that the big thing, too, that I know about you and is sort of backed up by research, or just, your name is attached to all these places. And anybody listening to this who's climbed in all these places is going to recognize the name Jay Smith, because it's there all the time. And so that's kind of the interesting thing, is that you're this incredibly prolific climber who's climbed first ascents worldwide, and many, many of them significant. And yet, like I said, I was like, well, where is he? I can hardly even find any pictures of him, other than the really crusty one with all the ice on you. And so I guess what I'm wondering too is, when you, besides the fact that nobody's in these places, when you do decide on an objective, especially an objective that's going to, cost you money, time, an incredible amount of effort, let's say something in Patagonia, or something, in Asia or anything else, what is it that you think is some of the key factors when you're like, this is something I want to go do with my time, maybe risk my life for it, but I have to go do these things?
I'd say it's the beauty of either the peak or, the formation, or, if you went to Yosemite and you walked in for the first time and you saw the nose and it hadn't been climbed, you'd be drawn to something like that. And when I've gone to these other areas, I can see lines similar, and it catches my eye, and it's like, whoa, that's an awesome looking route, and it hasn't been climbed, and yeah, I'd like to do it. And so as I find those over time, I try to take them off, and I only choose things that I think I can climb. I don't choose things that are beyond me. I try not to. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't push the standards too much, and certainly not by today's standards. And, I just like to climb at my limit, whatever that may be.
So when have you overstepped your bounds? When can you cite any time where you were like, your eyes were a little bigger than what you could stomach?
No, not necessarily, but a lot of the routes that I've done, a lot of the big routes, like in Patagonia, not necessarily all of them, but, the route like the Phantom Wall and my route on Middle Triple and Kashatan Spire, those all took me 2 attempts.
Right.
They all, I don't know why it is. It always takes me 2 attempts. Is that bad luck or bad climbing? I don't know what. But.
Well, have you ever really thought about it? What do you think? Is it a matter of like figuring out logistics the first time around, or
no? I think a lot of it has to do with weather.
Oh, okay. So it's just bad luck. Right.
Well, it didn't used to be that people could get on the internet and get weather forecasts.
Sure. Right.
And so when I was climbing Patagonia, we didn't have anything like that. We just had a barometer.
What years was that?
First year I went was 87, 88 with Bridwell, and we climbed the Cerro Stanhart and Desmachado, and tried Cerro Torre.
Okay. That line on, what was the route you did on Stanhart?
Exocet.
Right.
Probably the easiest way up the mountain.
Right. Maybe the most obvious line then.
Yeah, except when we went originally, we tried the south face, because Bridwell had talked to some Brits, and they said, yeah, the south face is 5'7".
Oh, right.
Well, we got around, you kind of start to the north and go up the ramp and come around the south face, and I looked up, and there was the mushrooms jutted out 100 feet.
Right.
I was like, Bridwell, how do you get past that, And, right then a storm came in and chased us down.
Uh-huh.
And it was funny because that night before we went, we were in a Bergschrund right at the start of the route. And at like 4 a.m, a voice came into the door of our cave, more or less, and asked, he goes, is Jim Bridwell there? And I was just like, whoa, here we are in the middle of nowhere. I'd never been to Patagonia before. And there's somebody asking where Bridwell is at 4 a.m. And so all of a sudden found out it was these 2 guys, and they were going for the first ascent of the Stanhart as well.
Okay.
And here we were, I didn't realize it was such a prize at the time. But, yeah, so.
So what did they want?
They just had heard that he was there, and I guess, they wanted to say hi.
A brush with greatness, as it were? Yeah.
I don't know, but they were all of a sudden there in front of us. And
so
then we all got stormed off.
Oh, okay. And then you guys came back.
And they weren't able to come back.
Okay.
And they actually had tried the chimney, the Exocet. And when we were coming down, I looked up at the chimney and saw it was an ice line. And, of course, I was way into ice climbing at the time. And, that looked like a much more logical way than what we had just tried.
Right.
So we went back down and regrouped and came back up and did it.
So you essentially grew up climbing in the 70s. You mentioned right before we started that the first time you climbed was in 1969.
Yeah.
And so then you grew up climbing in the 70s. And to me, like the 70s, in a lot of ways became this era of specialization where there was these free climbers and there was these guys who, started using chalk, and bouldering kind of came into existence all during this time. And yet it seems to me that you pursued an all-around ethic of being able to climb whatever it happens to be. Looking at your resume, that's what it says. Free climbing, desert, big mountains, ice climbing, whatever it happens to be. What is it that draws you to being somebody that can do all the disciplines?
Well, maybe I'm not that great at any one of them. I don't know. I mean, it's just like, you start out by rock climbing, and next thing you know, it's winter. Then what are you going to do? Well, in those days, there was no gym. So, my first ice climb was the North Face of Talkeets in 1971 or something with a crag hammer and a ice axe that I borrowed, and we didn't even get up the thing. Or actually, the second try I think we did. The first time we were hauling a frame pack, and we had 4 pitons and a couple slings, and you'd pick up Mountain Magazine or something and look at, look at these guys are doing, because when I started climbing, I didn't know any climbers. Mm-hmm. I had never met a climber.
And so did you start in Southern California?
Well, what actually happened was I was growing up in Sonoma, and this is in the 60s, late 60s, and things were going on in California, and Haight-Ashbury, and drugs, and all that stuff. And here I was, I was still in high school, just getting into high school. And, all this stuff's going on in the streets, and my folks saw that, and they're like, we're sending you to Knowles.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I didn't even know what Knowles was. Anyway, so I went off. So they dropped me off in Wyoming, and I met Paul Petzold, and I did a course. And,
what kind of kid were you?
well, I grew up on a ranch.
Oh, okay.
But, lived 7 miles from town, had to hitchhike to town. And, it was the flatlands. There was no climbing or anything around. And my folks were, they were my dad was into hunting and roping and things like that. Mm-hmm. And, it wasn't until they sent me to Knowles that I saw something different and something, I don't know, just because it wasn't even a climbing course that I took, but we did go climbing at the end of the course. And on my very first climb, we actually had an accident. There was no guides, no instructors with us. They said, oh, yeah, you can go. And we started out, and we went up this climb, and there was 4 of us. And the leader actually got up and set himself a stance. This was before nuts. This was like we had pitons and, 1-inch webbing except for swamis. And anyway, he knocked a rock off, and that rock came down and beamed my tent mate. And it was a major rescue. And, he was never, my tent mate was never the same after that.
So...
But anyway, that was my very first
time. Let me get this straight. These guys, you were all students?
Yeah.
And they were just like, yeah, we're
go.
not into it. Go for it. Have a good time up there.
There was a thing called Easy Day Peak, and, I've never been back to it since. But,
really? This is so insane.
Major accident.
Like in the modern
major
age.
Rescue.
That they're just be like, yeah, we're busy. Here's some ropes. We taught you that yesterday. Go for it.
Yeah.
And so, kid like bleeding and
oh yeah, man. I was holding them in my arms, skull fracture.
Holy cow!
It was, they had to send out a runner 10 miles just to get to a phone.
Okay.
To make the emergency call.
And yet, that was your first climb.
That was my very first climb.
And you were like holding a bloody person. And you're like, wow, this is actually something I could really get into.
Well, I think it was a while after that.
I really like this. This is really great.
I went to a boarding school, and I had a tent mate, and we ended up picking up a roommate, and I had somebody gave me a Royal Robbins book, and I was going to school in Idlewild.
Okay.
So we had boulders on campus.
Right.
And we just started climbing, and like, okay, look at, this is, read the book and go out and do it, because we could walk to these places.
And the boarding school didn't have any sort of climbing program at that point?
No, we started the program.
Oh, okay.
So within a year, we got this guy his name was Bud Couch, who he later changed his name to Ivan Couch, but he put up First Ascent of Valhalla, Sundance, a lot of the hard routes on Talkeet Suicide.
Right.
And he became our instructor. And, of course, eventually made huge gains through his guidance.
Right. That's awesome. So when did you kind of change over to thinking about, you're a kid dabbling in it and going to high school, and then I assume your parents probably wanted you to go on to secondary sort of education. And when did you decide that climbing was like the thing, that this was going to be something that probably guided your life for the rest of, up until us sitting here, I think, to a certain extent?
I don't know. In those days, like I said, I didn't know anybody that climbed. I started meeting people, but it gave me direction. It gave me something to do, something I really enjoyed doing. I thought it was something totally different that nobody else did. and I enjoyed it, and I got my roommate into it, and he was excelling at the sport, and we just kind of played along the game with our friends who were in school with us. We got some of them involved, and a lot of those people went on to become, pretty good climbers, pursued it for quite some time. Yeah, it just became a lifestyle almost immediately, and as soon as I graduated from high school, I went back to that high school and taught climbing for a year.
Okay, at in the program you'd started, essentially, or you and your friends had started.
Yeah,
awesome. So you get out of high school. Did you end up going to college?
Yeah, I went to the University of Colorado.
Oh, okay, right on. So you moved out to Boulder.
Yeah,
a transplant from California.
Yeah, because Boulder had a lot of climbing, right?
Right.
And of course, that was a summer program, and so I got involved in that. It's a long story, but anyway, it was like
This is a long podcast.
Yeah, it was a summer program. It started before I got out of high school.
Okay.
So I got into it late, and then when I got there, then, of course, all they wanted to do was go climbing. It was like, I just graduated from high school. I haven't been out of it for a week, and here I'm already, a month behind in college.
Right.
And so that didn't help.
Right.
And so I ended up just kind of dropping out after a while and going climbing in Boulder, and then moved back and taught climbing for a year, and then went back to school after that. But
okay. And let's talk about sort of the life of climbing and the career in climbing. You've done a lot of guiding over the years. Yeah. And one of the storied things about your guiding is that you were a big part of guiding SEALs. Is that are you allowed to talk about that?
Yeah, I don't think that's so secret anymore.
I was just waiting for a little red dot to come across on your forehead for a second.
Well, yeah. I mean, at the time, it was an elite SEAL team. I won't even mention who it was, but at the time, I didn't really know who these guys were. We had to start a guide service in Lake Tahoe. These guys came up and asked us if we could do a course for them. And the first trip we ever did was ice climbing and levining. And we went out there and we dug a snow cave, and we all got in this cave. And I started looking at these guys, and, they all have the same watch. They all about the same age. They don't look like sheriffs. And we're sitting in the cave, and we're like, wait a minute, you guys aren't sheriff's rescue team. Who are you?
Yeah, you've got your shit wired a little tighter than I would expect from a sheriff's rescue team, right?
And of course, the first thing they say is, well, we could tell you, but we'd have to kill you.
Wink.
Yeah, so then I worked with those guys for 20 years.
Okay. Getting the same team or getting different people through?
Mainly with the same team.
Okay.
And they were the elite team. They were the ones that had the money.
Right.
And, we weren't allowed to talk about it.
Right.
In fact, I signed waivers that, if I could go to prison for talking about it.
All right, great.
I think at this stage...
This would be great. The Enormocast can my first guest that was thrown in jail for something he said on here.
Yeah, right. But, yeah, I mean, they were really great guys to work with, and they didn't tell me any secrets.
Right.
They told me some stories, though.
Yeah, sure. Well, I actually guided for quite a few years, and we ran some rangers through our school. It's CMS up in Estes Park. We ran these rangers through occasionally from Fort Bragg. Is that where those guys are? Yeah. Or is it Airborne? I don't know. Big Army dudes, right? Yeah. And maybe not quite the the elite level of what these SEALs guys were probably like. But it was pretty fun to have those guys come out because they weren't normal clients. And you could, basically they were like, we can go, and if something happens to us, it's not your fault. Like,
yeah, right.
So we could allow them to, legally, we could allow them to lead, and we could allow them to do all these things that you wouldn't necessarily let climbers do. But it was funny because, they were from sea level, essentially. And it was Topher Donahue, both tiny little dudes, and super rangy, and we hike up and down Lumpy, every day for weeks on end, just smoking these guys on the trail, these huge dudes, and we're just running circles around, and they just sweating. They just couldn't believe it. Right. And then one year they came and they wanted to learn to aid climb, apparently to, assault some castle on the mountain top or whatever it happens to be. And man, watching these like 240-pound, like muscle-bound dudes like bounce testing like nuts and stuff was insane. Like
stand back.
Yeah, just waiting for the entire like mountain to like completely fall off. So sort of story. I remember those guys being pretty wild. But always ready to go. Yeah, they're super fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, like super ready to go.
And they'll do anything you tell them to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, give it a try. Yeah, for sure.
Right.
So, I don't know. I wonder what they, they probably use some of that stuff over the years.
Oh, yeah. I think it's, I look back at what's happened since I worked with them and them going to Iran and Afghanistan and, Iraq. And
all
everywhere.
That, and the caves and the mountain, the mountain enclaves and all that stuff in the beginning of Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's finally paid off. I mean, these were, they're Navy SEALs. You expect them to operate only, within, their AO, area of operation, was like 10 miles from the coast.
Right.
Well, that all changed.
Yeah, exactly.
So the climbing, I think, actually paid off.
So what else have you done to keep climbing a part of your life and make a living?
Well, guiding was the big thing. And then because of the SEALs, actually, I got introduced to adventure racing.
Okay.
Because some of the SEALs were on the team with Mark Burnett, who eventually, he's the one that started the Eco Challenge. Mm-hmm. And of course, he's got all these programs on television now, Survivor and all these other things that I think are still on the air. But anyway, so Mark raced with 2 SEALs that I had worked with. And then when Mark started the Eco Challenge, the guys I had worked with recommended me as a person to maybe rig.
Okay.
Of course, the first race was out here in Moab. It was the first Eco Challenge, and it was an awesome job. I mean, it was Dan Osmond and myself, and the other guy Jeff Maliska from Tahoe was kind of helped out just on the rigging part, and then later I had a big crew to work the race and everything.
Right.
And that worked into numerous jobs over the years.
Uh-huh. And you actually ended up racing once, you said.
Yeah, in 95, I ended up competing in the Raid Gauloise, but our team kind of fell apart. But we finished the race.
Right. Where was it?
Argentina.
Okay.
So Patagonia. They said Patagonia.
Right.
And, of course, I'd already been to Patagonia a bunch of times. And, it turned out that adventure racing isn't quite like mountaineering or climbing, but there's more rules and regulations that you have to go by. And, but it was fun, and I learned a lot, and it was, I was actually on a really good team. So it was
and then
a good experience.
You rigged the Primal Quest that was right here in the valley, and I also worked on that. We talked about that a little bit earlier, but it's the one. What was the deal with the towers? What was the obstacle in the operation there on Castleton and right here in your backyard, essentially?
Right. So actually, the race director, I guess he would be considered a race director anyway. It was Don Mann, who was a Navy SEAL.
Okay.
That I had worked with before. So when they came out and did this thing, he's like, "What can you do?" And I'm like, "Well, where's this race going to go?" And he's like, "Well, we want it to go here and here and here and here." So we ended up having 6 different locations throughout the desert where there was ropes, and we would go and rig these things, and then we actually pre-rigged them before the race, took them down because you're not allowed to leave ropes hanging on public land.
Right.
And then right before the race, we had to go back and put them back in again as the competitors were coming.
Right.
And so there was 2 of us doing that, and then we had a crew that manned those ropes, and then those crews would leapfrog along, and we had 6 locations. And the last one was Castleton Tower and the rectory and the priest and all that. And so, it's for television, right?
Right.
So we're trying to make it spectacular, and you're kind of limited on what you can do. In those days, it was more like just ascending and rappelling. Mm-hmm. And so we had them ascend the north face of Castleton, Jumar all the way up there, and then wrap the south side, then go across the rectory, and we had fixed ropes up Fine Jade. And, we made sure, since I live here and I'm well aware of the rock and not destroying it and everything, we put no bolts in. I mean, it was all natural stuff.
Uh-huh.
And when we did Gemini bridges, we wrapped them with wrapped the ropes around the arches. So it was all natural. There wasn't a single nut placement on the whole thing.
Oh, right.
And we kind of did the same thing with the priest Well, with the rectory, and then we had a high line over the priest.
That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, because you guys had like a zip line or high line or whatever they had to cross.
Yeah.
For some reason, I imagined it from the rectory to Castleton, but that's absurd. That would be annoying.
Well, they've done that.
Oh, they have?
Yeah.
Okay,
it was
so
actually, when it was
absurd.
done, it was the longest high line in the world.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's a long way. Yeah,
and only one person got across it.
Really?
Yeah. And I think it took like 8 guys to carry the rope up there.
Okay. Yeah.
And by the time they got it up and rigged and everything, I think one guy got across and then they took it down. I don't know. I don't even know when that happened. I never saw it.
But and then the one at the Gemini Bridges, is that where they were zipping their bikes down it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
I remember I was a PA on that and running around with the camera guy. And so I'd show up at these things and just be like, whoa, this is pretty elaborate.
It was fun. I mean, it was, get creative and make it as attractive as you can for the competitors.
Right.
Because it's all about their race, And a lot of them at the end of the race said the ropes course was the best part of the race. And yet there was, there was lots of mountain biking and paddling and, but a lot of people came up to me and said that. And that made me feel really good, and no accidents. And that's with 360 people traveling through the desert, day 6 or day 10, coming across on the ropes, you're like...
Yeah, because they're not themselves. I mean, they've been up all night. Those races, they're not as fashionable as they once were. But yeah, I mean, they were insane. Like, these people would go and they'd have to force them to sleep or to stop or, to take care of their feet, or they'd be hobbling by with, like, the worst blisters anybody's ever seen.
Oh, yeah.
And, it was insane.
Yeah, and the problem is, I mean, all the competitors would love to still be doing it, but it never, as a television program, it just never got edited as well as it could have been. I think the race here could have been pretty interesting, but, production and directors who, or the networks who have the final say in the program, they cut out a lot of stuff, and it's just not the same.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
I don't know if it really, does it make a good television program? Probably not.
Yeah, who knows?
Does climbing?
Yeah,
not necessarily.
Really. No, not really. Although the Meru guys have sort of proven that to be possible anyway, to entertain a massive crowd with a climbing movie. But yeah, I mean, even during it, because I was running, literally or hiking half the time with these crews through the middle of the night with the teams, and you're just like, well, this actually isn't that interesting. Like, we're just walking in the dark right now, and I don't know. I kind of was like, all right.
But you're beating somebody.
Yeah, that's true. Somebody somewhere on this course is behind us, we think, except for we don't know. Yeah. So I was telling you earlier too that I started doing that. I was like, yeah, I'll get $200 a day or whatever it was to do whatever you tell me to do. I happen to be here. And then the first day I had to run with one of these teams, like out of the gates. And like basically a couple hours into it, I was like, is this what I'm going to be doing for 6 days? Is just running with these people? I don't run. I'm a rock climber. Like I should have been on your crew is what I should have been done. I should have been actually when I was up at Gemini Bridges, because I showed up there and everybody was chilling. Kitty was up there actually. And I was like, oh, yeah, this is what I should have been doing. Actually.
Zach Smith was working there.
Oh, yeah, Zach was up there, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I was like, I guess this
I had
like...
a great crew,
yeah,
right?
Totally.
I had a really good crew. And I've always had a great crew, and they've always been, good friends and climbers, and they're all solid, and most of them were guides, and,
Yeah.
And we, like I said, I've worked a bunch of these races, and we never, ever had an accident.
Yeah.
And that was, knock on wood, whatever, but...
yeah.
And the race, it's unfortunate. The races have gone away. And, without the support of television, they're just not going to happen.
Well,
they're too expensive.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's this huge operation, like elaborate. You guys were just a small part of the whole.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing. So.
I mean, it was $1 million to put those things on.
At least.
And they didn't, at least.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about climbing. We have to do that. That's what this podcast is all about. But that's cool stuff. We kind of cross paths in a very remote way on that particular thing. I do actually remember talking to you at the party afterwards down at the, was that the Red Cliff or at the Soil? Yeah. Anyway, but let's talk about your climbing a little bit. And I kind of warned you I might ask you this, so hopefully you've had a few moments to think about it. But, you know, in this career, again, where your name is attached to things here in the desert and things in Red Rocks and things in Patagonia and, you know, all over the world, Alaska, you know, can you point to a couple, like, ascents or a couple trips or a couple things that, you know, when you write your memoir, as it were, or writing, hopefully at this moment, or, you know, that'll get a chapter that'll be like, this was an important thing that I did, not necessarily important to everybody else. Maybe we don't even know about it, but it was important to you as a development of a climber, as a person, or what have you.
Well, you know, as I think back over the years of climbing, what stands out are the big climbs that I've done. You know, I mean, I could go sport climbing. I mean, I've had fun in Australia, you know, climbing one pitch routes and stuff like that. But what really stands out are the big routes that I've done. You know, like, you know, Torrieger is certainly one of them, and, you know, Kachatna Spire and Middle Triple. And it's the big routes that you pull off, and you're like, whoa! That at the time, that was awesome. I mean, That was a big effort. I'm glad we did it and we lived through it, and, you know, we could have died at this point or that point, and, you know, so yeah, so that's what stands out. And you always try to have fun on these climbs, right? And the first big expedition I ever did was to Everest in 1985, and I was on an expedition with 20 other climbers, and half of them I didn't know. Some of them I did know. Bridwell was on there, and actually met Ed Webster on that trip, and Pete Athens was on that trip, and this guy Andy Politz, who I actually haven't seen since, but he was there's a bunch of great guys. Mm-hmm. But it was a huge team, and, you know, it wasn't the kind of climbing. I mean, Everest was cool because before that I'd only been to Mount Whitney. That was the highest thing I'd ever climbed. Okay. So I went from Whitney to Everest, and then I felt like I could have done it. You know, got to over 8,000 meters on the thing, but I realized that that's not the kind of climbing I want to do. So the year after that, I put together a trip of 4 of us, and we went and climbed Cantega, and that was more in line.
What's that?
Cantega is next to Ama de Blanc.
Okay.
It's 22,320 feet, something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's just a beautiful peak that I saw when I was in the Khumbu. And there was, you know, the North Face was unclimbed at the time. In fact, Kevin Mahoney and Freddie Wilkinson, those guys went back and actually climbed the North Face quite a few years later. But so when you go into a place and you see what has not been done, and you see some real striking line, I mean, most climbers would like, whoa, that hasn't been climbed? You know, we got to go do it. So that's kind of, you know, been my theme the whole time.
How did you end up on the Everest trip? Having only climbed Mount Whitney.
I think Bridwell. I didn't even know Bridwell at the time, really. And, you know, but he lived in Tahoe and North Shore. I lived in South Shore. And I don't know. I think somehow I got invited because of him.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like he had some respect for you that you
I
may not have known
guess.
about?
I mean, yeah, right. I didn't have any kind of name. I mean, you know, I hadn't done anything. I'd been to Alaska once at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. So then I got to see the Himalayas, and, you know, immediately was drawn back, and so that kind of started off on, you know, the big alpine thing.
So you keep mentioning Bridwell, having climbed a lot with that guy. That was your first trip with him?
That was my first trip.
Yeah.
I didn't really climb a lot with Bridwell.
Okay.
Well, certainly before that, I hadn't climbed at all with him. I'd seen him around, you know. I mean, I was kind of on the periphery in Yosemite at the time. You know, there's people like Kalkenbacker.
Right.
You know, those guys lived there the whole time, and I would just show up, you know, be there a week or two and go do something and, you know, hang out in Camp 4 and all that stuff. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, after the Everest thing, that's when Bridwell asked me to go to Patagonia. Okay.
So you must have shown him something on that trip as well, then.
I guess. Well, you mean in Patagonia?
No, I mean on the Himalayas to come back and And of those 20 guys, he's like, all right, this guy's cool. We'll take him to Patagonia.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that's a pretty, like, getting called up to the big leagues.
Yeah, I mean, it was Bridwell, right? It was
Bridwell, like the camp's named after the guy.
And so I learned a lot from him, you know.
Yeah.
And he was a good partner on that stuff.
Right.
And we did some routes.
So who else can you talk about in terms of like the partners you've had that you either kept for a lifetime or had like an ultimate respect for as you were climbing? Either you learned a lot from them, or they were someone whose camaraderie was the best, or just someone you had a ton of respect for.
I mean, I've had a lot of good partners. Paul Crawford in Tahoe. Paul was my main partner for years and years and years when we were climbing Calaveras and around Tahoe and stuff. And he's still climbing wicked hard as far as I know. And, Steve Gerberdine I climbed with for years and years, and we did a bunch of routes together. And Conrad Anker, we did a bunch of routes. And actually, Steve Conrad and I climbed, we climbed Edgar together and a few other things. And Dan Osman, did a few trips with him. And then, of course, got involved with the North Face and then met a bunch of other people. And Alex Lowe, Greg Child. And but didn't really do, I mean, we all went to the Oxu in 95. Mm-hmm. But that's also when I met my wife, Kitty Calhoun, and we did a trip to the Oxu. And then we ended up doing a bunch of trips together after that. Well, Jack Tackle, I've done a bunch of trips with. And Danini, I climb with Danini all the time.
Right.
He's been probably one of my biggest inspirations. I mean, he's 10 years older than me.
Right.
He's still out there.
Right.
He goes every opportunity he can.
Sure.
He'll go climbing.
Right.
And so it's like, I'm trying to keep up with him.
Isn't he in Indian Creek right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like with the masses. It's like hammered away down there.
Yeah. But he never tires of climbing.
Right.
Never.
Have you? Have you ever had periods where you're away from it?
Not very long.
Right.
Just, a couple weeks.
A couple.
Here and there, or, maybe a bit more than that. But right now, like you said, I've just come back to the Himalayas. I can use a break right now.
Right. From the Himalayas or from climbing?
From climbing even. Well, I was just in New York a couple of days ago and got to stay with Russ Clune. And we're in the Gungson. It was, it's November and it's supposed to be raining and cold. And it was 75 degrees and it was awesome.
Right.
And, Kitty and I, we hadn't rock climbed since August. And, we just came back from the Himalayas. And so we started out on a 5.3. And then our second route was a 5.3. And the next day we stepped up to 5.4. And it
nice
was
job.
like,
good job.
And it was like the gunks, It's like, hey, this is fun.
Yeah.
And we can wear a T-shirt and.
Yeah, I mean, you get a good night's sleep, you're going to want to go climbing again. That's all you probably really need.
You kind of can get burnt out, but I think if it's a nice day outside and it's warm, all of a sudden you're like, well, I should be out there climbing.
Right. So let's, you kind of started to seg into it, and I wanted to ask you about that age, and you told me like, I'm not embarrassed about age, you can ask me what you want about it. It's not like a big thing to me, but, so you just mentioned Danini's 10 years older than you, he's still cranking it out. What has it meant to you to
get older?
Yeah, to get older, but to stay climbing and to be somebody who's, again, I mean, I just keep going back to this career. It's mind-boggling the amount of things you've done.
I don't know what else to do.
Right.
With myself.
Right.
Climbing, it gives you a goal. It gives you something to strive for. It keeps you, reasonably fit, hopefully. And if I didn't do that, what would I be doing? I see people mountain biking, around here. There's 1,000 mountain bikers, and people are base jumping and paddling and doing all this stuff. And I don't know. None of that really appeals to me because, it's a little bit, it's not what I've been doing. I'm not very good at it,
right.
Any of those things. And climbing is kind of the only thing I've known forever. And I don't know what's going to happen when I can't climb anymore.
Right.
But at least I have people like Danini kind of
Yeah.
You know?
Holding that carrot out there, like, it can be done.
It's like, if he can do it, hopefully I can do it.
Yeah, well, mountain biking means one thing: broken bones. That's all it's going to result in. So stay away from that. But so what about? I mean, I'm going to ask you this because a concern, I have personally, and a lot of people voice, especially if they're climbing hard or climbing at a certain level is important to them. What do you do when it's like, okay, I was this guy and I can't do that anymore? And
we got to learn to accept it.
Well, and the big thing with me is boldness. Is that's the one thing I've like. I would say I was such a lazy climber that I've not met I still have a threshold physically that I never found when I was younger because I was so lazy. So I still have that, but I just am not as bold as I once was.
Well, yeah.
So
people realize after a while that they are mortal, right? And we talked about that on this last expedition we did, that when I was climbing back in the 80s, 90s, I felt like I could do anything, right? I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like I could easily trip and break my leg or whatever, but I'm trying not to have that hold me back, so I just have to limit to what I'm doing. And I just try to keep it in control and not do things that are way beyond me. Right. So, I'm not climbing, I never have climbed 513, and I've climbed some hard 12s and stuff. Can I do that now? No, probably not. I'll be glad to climb 511. But as long as I feel like I'm doing my best and climbing at my limit, that's fine. And being bold, no, I'm not nearly, I used to do some big old run out stuff, and the thought of doing that stuff now, no. I wouldn't do it. Yeah,
it's weird.
I wouldn't even want to repeat a lot of my routes,
No. Yeah, no.
It's like you did it once. Why do you have to do it again?
Totally. Yeah, that's the way I actually, another time we crossed paths was years ago in Yosemite, and I was I was super into aid climbing on El Cap and A5 and whatever that means. But if someone like somehow magically just transported me, the 44-year-old me, into the middle of one of those pitches that I used to have no problem with, I'd go catatonic and have a complete meltdown, just like start frothing at the mouth. And I used to just be able to do it. It was almost like it was someone else doing it. Like I could just stand back and go, whatever, just jump on the hook, do what you need to do,
Right. Just keep going.
Yeah.
Just get up there.
Right.
The layer's waiting on you.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's how I started soloing things, because I didn't want that pressure behind me. I could do 8 or 9 hours up there without any problems coming from the rope. But yeah, so it's a curious thing. And I think it is something that in this age now with sport climbing and with people so performance oriented in a way, I think it existed, but not with the fervor that it does now. That is a concern of what's going to happen when all I can do is climb this or all I can do is climb that.
Well, hopefully you'll be still having fun.
Right.
And, you're able to get out there and do that thing because, in the crew that I hang out with, we're all getting older, and a lot of us are having some kind of issues, right? I mean, either your shoulder's killing you or your elbow or your finger or something's wrong, Now you talk about all your surgeries and, it's like, well, if you can stay healthy and keep climbing, you're way ahead of the game, right? So that's you just want to have fun. You want to get out there, but feel like you're doing your best.
Right.
And, if that's 5'8" wherever you're at, at whatever age, as long as you're still having fun and you're, I was just talking to Russ Clune, and Fritz Wiesner was climbing in the gunks at 85.
Right.
85.
Yeah.
He's up there, and I don't know if he was leading or, but hey, he lived that long, most, half my friends have, they don't even exist anymore.
Right.
They didn't even get to 50.
Right. Well, and you think about what the alternative of, most of the 85-year-olds in America are, and it's bleak. It isn't climbing in the gunks on a sunny day, that's for sure.
Right. No, and you look around and there's people, and they're hobbling around. There's, people have some issue. But there is a few people out there, like Danini, like Rab Carrington, you know. I mean, there's these guys who are 70 and up. I mean, there's a bunch of them. And they're still climbing hard, and they're out there all the time, and they're having fun. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to do.
What kind of motivation is having Kitty around and having a relationship with the climber?
Well, Kitty's, you know, I mean, she's a great wife, and, you know, her life is climbing as well. And, of course, now she's just become one of the owners of Chicks with Picks. So she's got a whole new career in front of her, which I questioned, you know, really, do you want to do that? But her partners are all really good people, really good guides. I think they have a great business going. And, you know, so that's going to take up a lot of her time. So I got to find something else to do, you know. I mean, because she's going to be out there guiding and working and all that stuff. And so, I mean, and the other thing is, you know, it gives me opportunities to go out and do my photography and go out and shoot stuff. And that's always been fun, too.
And there's your Corvettes.
Yeah, well.
Rebuilding those things. One of them's bound to break.
And they've been...
It already broke, actually, while we were sitting in here.
It
was just something fell off of it, I heard. No, and I guess maybe the last question I have in terms of all this stuff, because you said your cohort now, you know, you've got all these guys that, you know, you guys can sit around and talk about your ailments, just like old boys should do. But what about climbing with younger folks? And what about mentoring? Or you were a guide with your rigging company. Sounds like, you know, you brought in a bunch of younger folks to work for you. Does that play into it at all? Because, again, coming from me personally, I try to sport climb hard still in rifle and things like that. And I have some friends that are in my sort of age group that I climb with, but I end up having to climb with, you know, kids half my age all the time. And it's pretty motivating, actually. You know, sometimes it's super annoying. But then the other big one is
These are just partners you're talking about.
Yeah, just partners. And you know, I climb with Hayden Kennedy quite a bit. And went down to Mexico with him last year to climb on El Gigante. And I was concerned, you know, like, we're going to go down there for 3 weeks. And, like, you know, I'm for sure going to get annoyed with him because he's, like, has too much fucking energy, and he's going to sure get annoyed with me because I'm like a grumpy, crusty jerk. And yet it worked out really well. And it speaks to his maturity to a certain extent with dealing with, you know, me. But it also, I mean, I just don't know who else I would have gone down and climbed that wall in that way with, you know.
Right.
So do you have any, like, are you folks around here that you're like, all right, I'll climb with that guy?
Well, you know, I guess I'm always a little bit shy or whatever. I mean, I always felt like I needed to, you know, climb well. And if I go out with some kid that's 14 years old and they're dragging me up something, you know, that I wouldn't feel so good about that.
Right.
I mean, when I was guiding, it was different because, you know, you're teaching people how to climb and it's kind of a different situation. And so I guess I've chosen to climb with people that I know. Right. And know how they climb and stuff. But, you know, I'm at that stage now where I need to get out and climb with some younger people. And that's what, you know, Kitty's all behind that, you know, mentoring. And there's a bunch of people, you know, it's just kind of coming to light in my eyes that, you know, maybe there's something I can do here. And I, you know, Danini's a perfect example of that, you know. Somebody will contact him on whatever, on the internet, and he's like, oh, yeah, come on out, I'll take you climbing. And he does that all the time. So he's going to climb with total strangers. Right. That's something I've never really done, but, you know, actually when I get out and do something like that, it's fun. So.
All right, well, you just blew it. Because I get an email a week of, like, young climbers, like, just getting into it, like, well, how do I even find someone that's going to teach me how to climb safely and, like, do it the way, you know, you learned how to do it? So if they can find your email on the internet, you're going to just get inundated.
No, I'm going to change it out.
Anyway, well, look, I wanted to ask you that because to me that is this lost, or this thing that climbing is losing to a certain extent, in not in a formal way that, you know, the climbers with experience need to, have some sort of weird, bevy of young climbers that they're teaching. But, with this gym thing and so many people getting into climbing, like all the folks we saw in Castleton just having the most epic days ever up there, getting totally beat down. Like, there is this kind of like lack of people with experience out there, like mentoring people with a little bit less experience. And I don't see you, like some guy that's never climbed before, like, come on, let's go climbing, Junior. But as an alpinist, as someone who has so much experience in that realm, I think that some hotshot climber that climbs ice crazy well and has done whatever still has a ton to learn from somebody like you or somebody like Jack or somebody like Donini. It's like you don't. I'm sort of lecturing you right now.
Well,
I just realized that. Hey, listen, mister, you need to teach them.
If somebody walked up and asked me, hey, would you take me climbing or something? I might look at them and make a decision right there on the spot. And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure, Is
your daisy chain through your legs? No, you can't go.
What are you wearing?
Right now.
But, that happened just recently in Ouray. Mm-hmm. There's a woman walked up and she's like, oh, would you take me for an ice climb? Turns out she was a really good climber.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that's what I'm getting at, man, is you have something to teach them besides whether or not they can get up.
Well, I guided for 20 years, so,
right.
That's kind of...
Right.
And so now I worry about if somebody gets hurt or something, hopefully that's not going to happen on my watch.
Right.
But if I'm at the crags and I see somebody and they're doing something that they shouldn't be, then I'll say something.
Right.
For sure.
Right. Cool. All right. Well, we've just ripped through an hour. How was that?
All right, Chris. Well, you've made me do it, so hopefully nobody in your audience gets sick or something.
Let's do that ending again. Don't say I made you do it.
No?
All right, we're going to do it again. You're just going to say,
let
thanks,
go of my arm.
it was
let
a
go
pleasure.
Of my arm.
You're going to go, that was a real pleasure, Chris. Thanks, or something like that. That's what you're going to say now. No, I'm just kidding. But
that was a really good dinner you cooked tonight.
Oh, thanks, man.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, that's how I tricked Jay into coming in here.
And all that beer? Whoa.
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
Well, again, thanks a lot, Jay. We will hopefully hang out a little bit more. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Now you know where I live.
Yeah, totally.
Uh-oh.
You're like, will you take me climbing, Mr. Smith?
It might be the other way around.
All right, thanks, Jay.
All right, thanks.
All right, folks, that's another one in the bag. A real honor to get Jay Smith on the show. Jay's been getting after it for a long time, and I think that, like I said, because of the lack of publicity, everybody kind of knows his name, but maybe when you look at the width and depth and breadth and meat and chewy fat on his resume, it's pretty damn impressive. And I'm glad we got this one done. So, thanks everybody. If you want to support the Enormocast, please consider helping out. Go to enormocast.com, click on the Help Out tab. Bunch of stuff you can do. You can also donate to the cause if you wish to give up a few of your hard-earned dollars. I do appreciate that. And also remember to support our sponsors, including Belay Specs. BelaySpecs.com. Enter Enormocast at checkout and get a discount on those funky glasses that work so damn well. All right, everybody, get out there. If you go to the ice park, please don't just check your knot, but check everybody within like 100 yards of you, if you don't mind. Okay, just walk up and down there, do your duty, checking knots. Eventually, you'll catch somebody with a fucked up knot. I can guarantee it. All right, good day.
Want a beer?
You gonna call room service?
We got beer.
If you haul beer up this rock, you're insane.
I may be insane, but I'm not stupid. I didn't carry it. You did. It's in your pack.
She's told me that